The maintenance alarm buzzed through the corridors of Kepler Station just as Minho finished his morning coffee. He grabbed his toolkit and headed toward the xenobiology lab where something had broken down again. This was his life now, fixing things that other people broke, solving problems that other people couldn't handle, and being good enough at everything to keep the station running. Kepler Station was the pride of the Galactic Consortium, what orbited a distant star and housed the greatest minds from 50 different species. Each race had sent their best specialists to work together on projects that would benefit everyone. The crystalline beings designed perfect structures that would last forever. The hive-minded insects calculated supply chains with mathematical precision. The energy creatures handled all communication systems. The reptilian warriors protected everyone from threats. And then there were the humans. Minho walked through the main corridor, passing aliens who were masters of their trades. Veltar stood near the observation windows, his crystal body glowing. As he planned architectural improvements that would make the station more efficient, his people had built structures across the galaxy that had never needed repairs. Grex buzzed past in the opposite direction, carrying supply reports that his hive mind had calculated down to the last spare part. His species could predict exactly what would be needed months in advance, preventing shortages and waste. Near the communication center, Nora flickered between different energy states as she managed data streams from across the galaxy. Her people could process information faster than any computer and never made mistakes in translation between different alien languages. Minho nodded to them politely, but they barely noticed him. He was just the maintenance guy, the human who showed up when things broke. He wasn't the best at anything, but he was decent at most things. He could fix atmospheric processors, debug computer systems, perform basic medical treatments, pilot small ships, and even cook meals that didn't poison anyone. But he wasn't a master of any single skill. The xenobiology lab was in chaos when he arrived, Dr. Park. Hannah stood over a broken cell cultivation unit, her dark hair tied back in frustration. She was brilliant, one of the rising stars in the study of alien life forms. Her research had helped establish peaceful contact with 3 new species in the past year. Finally, she said without looking up, "The cultivation chamber is overheating again. I need it fixed in the next hour, or I'll lose 6 months of cell samples." Minho examined the unit. It was advanced technology, designed by the crystalline beings to maintain perfect growing conditions for alien organisms. The problem was obvious. A cooling valve had failed, but the replacement part wouldn't arrive for 3 days. "I can fix it temporarily," he said, opening his toolkit. "But you'll need to order a proper replacement." "Just make it work," Hannah replied, turning back to her microscope. "I don't need perfect, just functional." Minho smiled at that. Functional was his specialty. He pulled out some spare parts from other systems and began modifying the cooling assembly. It wasn't elegant, and it wouldn't last forever, but it would keep the samples alive until the proper parts arrived as he worked. He noticed something interesting about Hannah's research. She was studying cell division in a newly discovered species, but her approach seemed unnecessarily complicated. The equipment was set up to monitor every possible variable, creating massive amounts of data that would take weeks to analyze. "Have you tried simplifying the monitoring process?" he asked while adjusting the cooling system. "You might get clearer results if you focus on just the essential measurements." Hannah looked up from her work with annoyance. "I've been studying xenobiology for 8 years. I think I know how to set up my experiments." "Sorry," Minho said, focusing back on the repairs. "Just a thought." He finished the cooling system modification and tested it. The temperature readings stabilized within acceptable ranges. It wasn't perfect, but it would work. "There," he said, packing up his tools. "That should keep your samples safe for the next few days." "Thank you," Hannah said, though she didn't sound particularly grateful. "Is there anything else you need to fix while you're here?" "Everything else looks fine," Minho replied. "But if you do try that monitoring adjustment I mentioned, you might find the data easier to interpret." After he left, Hannah mentioned the interaction to her research assistant, Jin Wu, who was organizing data files. "That maintenance engineer thinks he knows how to do my job better than I do." What did he suggest? Jinwoo asked. Some simplification of the monitoring process, Hannah said dismissively. He's the almost guy, almost an engineer, almost a scientist, almost helpful. He's decent at fixing things, but he doesn't understand. Real research. The comment stung more than Minho expected when Jinwoo casually mentioned it to him later. He had heard similar things before. The crystalline beings thought human engineering was crude compared to their perfect designs. The hive minds considered human logistics inefficient and wasteful. The energy creatures found human communication slow and imprecise. But Minho had learned to live with being second best at everything. It was what made him useful on the station. When the environmental systems had problems, the environmental specialists were too busy with their perfect long-term projects to handle immediate repairs. When the communication array needed quick fixes, the communication experts were focused on optimizing data transmission rates. When someone needed basic medical attention, the medical specialists were conducting research on advanced treatments. That's when they called Minho, he was good enough at everything to solve immediate problems, while the experts worked on perfect solutions. Later that day, he was calibrating sensors in the astronomy section when Yoon Tae-young, his closest friend on the station, found him. Heard you had another encounter with Dr. Park, Tae-young said with a grin. Still thinks you're trying to tell her how to do her job? Maybe I am, Minho replied. Is that so wrong? Not wrong, just pointless, Tae-young said. She's a specialist. She's trained to be the best at one thing. You're a generalist. You're trained to be decent at everything. She can't understand why you'd want to know a little bit about everything instead of a lot about one thing. Minho considered this while he adjusted the sensor calibration. Sometimes I wonder if being decent at everything is actually better than being perfect at one thing. How do you figure? Well, when that cultivation chamber broke, Dr. Park couldn't fix it herself. She had to call me. And when I suggested a way to improve her experiment, she dismissed it without even considering whether it might work. What if being too specialized makes you blind to simple solutions? Tae-young laughed. That's a dangerous thought on a station full of specialists. That evening, Minho sat in his quarters, reading reports from across the galaxy. Trade disputes between species who couldn't understand each other's methods. Scientific projects that failed because different specialists couldn't coordinate their efforts. Military exercises that went wrong because each species insisted on using their own perfect tactics. He was starting to think that the galaxy's obsession with specialization might be a weakness, not a strength. But he kept that thought to himself. After all, he was just the almost guy. Almost smart enough to have opinions. Almost important enough to be heard. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Long-range sensors had detected something at the edge of the galaxy. Something big, organized, and moving toward inhabited space. The readings were unlike anything in the consortium's databases. Minich was fixing a broken replicator in the mess hall when the emergency announcement came through. All senior personnel were to report to the main conference room immediately. It didn't include him, but he could hear the discussions through the station's communication system as he worked. The objects are massive, reported the sensor technician. At least 50 vessels, each one larger than our biggest ships. They're moving in formation and seem to be scanning our outer colonies. Any response to our communication attempts? Asked Commander Lee Juan. None. They're ignoring all frequencies and protocols. Minho paused in his work. Unknown ships that didn't respond to communication were usually bad news. But the station's specialists would handle it. They were the experts, after all, he finished. Repairing the replicator and moved on to his next task, unaware that the galaxy was about to face a threat. That would make being almost good enough at everything more valuable than being perfect at one thing. The almost guy was about to become the most important person in the galaxy, though he didn't know it yet. As he worked through his daily routine of fixing, maintaining, and solving small problems, Minho couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The station felt different somehow, like everyone was holding their breath and waiting for something to happen. He was right to be worried. The unknown ships were just the beginning of a crisis that would test every assumption the galaxy had about specialization, perfection, and the value of being almost good enough at everything. But for now, he was just Minho, the maintenance engineer, who fixed things when they broke and got called almost guide by people who thought they were better than him. Soon those same people would be calling him for help, and he would answer not because he was perfect, but because he was good enough. The alarm bells rang through every corridor of Kepler Station. Minho dropped his wrench and ran toward the command center with everyone else. The sound meant only one thing. Danger was coming from space. Commander Li Guan stood at the main display screen. Her face looked serious as she pointed at the massive shapes moving across the star map. "We have contact with unknown vessels," she announced to the crowd of humans and aliens. "They appeared at the edge of our sensor range 2 hours ago. The shapes on the screen were huge, much bigger than any ship Minho had ever seen. They moved in a strange pattern, like they were alive. The metal surfaces seemed to pulse and shift as they traveled through space." Dr. Park. Hannah pushed through the crowd to get a better look. "What are they made of?" she asked. "The readings don't match." "Any known materials?" Veltar, the tall crystalline being, studied the data with his glowing eyes. "These vessels combine organic and mechanical elements," he said in his musical voice. "This should not be possible according to our understanding of engineering." Speaking for his hive mind people added more disturbing news. "Our deep space monitoring posts have gone silent. 17 stations stopped transmitting in the last 6 hours. The pattern suggests these ships are heading toward the core worlds." The room fell quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. The core worlds held billions of lives from dozens of different species. If something was destroying monitoring stations, it would reach populated planets soon. Nora, the energy being who looked like floating light, flickered with worry. "I'm detecting no response to our communication attempts. Whatever these entities are, they're not interested in talking." Thane, the reptilian warrior, stepped forward. His scales shifted from green to dark red, showing his anger. "Then we prepare. For battle, my people will mobilize our war fleets immediately." But as the hours passed, reports came in that made everyone afraid. The unknown ships didn't just destroy things, they seemed to learn from every attack. When the first defense fleet engaged them, the aliens watched how the weapons worked and changed their ships to resist them. Minho found himself running between departments as the station prepared for possible attack. In the engineering section, he helped repair damaged sensors that were trying to track the enemy ships. The readings kept changing as the alien vessels modified themselves. "Look at this," said Yun Tae-young, pointing at his pilot display. "There. Adapting to our scanning frequencies. Every time we get a clear reading, they shift and become invisible again." In the medical bay, Minho helped Dr. Park Hannah prepare for casualties. She was studying tissue samples from the destroyed monitoring stations, trying to understand what they were dealing with. "The organic components are unlike anything in our databases," she explained while looking through her microscope. "Seem to change their molecular structure based on external pressure. It's like they're designed to adapt to any environment." The first real battle happened 3 days later. The consortium's finest specialists put together their best defense. Veltar's people created massive crystal barriers in space, stronger than any known material. Grex's hive mind calculated the perfect positions for defense platforms. Nora's energy race powered weapon systems that could destroy planets. Thane's warriors brought their most advanced battleships. Minho watched the battle from the station's observation deck. At first it looked like the consortium was winning. The crystal barriers held against the enemy's strange weapons. The defense platforms fired in perfect coordination. Energy beams lit up space as they struck the alien ships, but then something terrible happened. The enemy ships began to change, where the crystal barriers blocked their weapons. The aliens developed new types of ammunition that could dissolve the crystal structure. When the defense platforms fired, the enemy ships grew new armor that absorbed the energy. "They're learning," whispered Dr. Park Hannah, who had joined Minho at the observation window. "Every attack we make teaches them how to defend against it." Battle turned into a disaster. One by one, the consortium's specialized defenses failed. The crystal barriers crumbled as the enemy found exactly the right frequency to shatter them. The defense platforms exploded when the aliens reflected their own weapons back at them. Even Thane's mighty warships retreated as their weapons became useless against the adaptive armor. Back in the command center, specialists argued about what to do next. Each species insisted their approach was correct, but they needed to try harder. "We need stronger crystal matrices," Veltar demanded. "If we can create barriers they cannot adapt to, we can contain them." "No," buzzed Grex. "The solution is better coordination. My people can calculate attack patterns they cannot predict." Nora flickered with disagreement. "Technology is the answer. We must develop new energy weapons faster than they can adapt." Thane slammed his clawed hand on the table. "All of you are wrong. We need more firepower, bigger ships, stronger weapons. We can overwhelm them before they adapt." Minho listened to the argument from the back of the room. He had an idea, but he knew nobody would listen to the maintenance engineer. Still wall. He couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was thinking about the problem wrong. More reports came in over the following days. Every colony that tried to defend itself using traditional methods was destroyed. The enemy seemed to understand exactly how each species fought and could counter their tactics perfectly. The worst news came from the scientific research stations. The enemy wasn't just destroying them, they were studying them. Captured recordings showed the alien ships taking apart consortium technology piece by piece, learning how everything worked. They're not just adapting. Dr. Parkhana realized during one of their emergency meetings. They're reverse engineering our entire civilization. Every defense we try teaches them more about us. The pattern became clear to Minho as he worked. Around the station, the enemy was incredibly good at understanding specialized approaches. When they faced crystal technology, they developed the perfect counter to crystals. When they met energy weapons, they created the ideal defense against energy. When they fought coordinated attacks, they found the exact way to disrupt coordination, but there was something else Minho noticed. The enemy seemed to struggle when things didn't follow patterns. During one attack, a damaged defense platform had fired randomly due to a malfunction. The enemy ships had taken longer to adapt to the chaotic, unpredictable shots that night. Minho couldn't sleep. He walked through the quiet corridors of the station, thinking about the problem. In the mess hall, he found Yuntae Young staring at a cup of coffee. "Can't sleep either?" "I keep thinking about how they adapt," Minho said, sitting down. "They're perfect at countering anything we throw at them. But what if we threw everything at them at once?" Yuntae Young looked confused. "What do you mean?" What if we didn't use specialized attacks? What if we used a little bit of everything, all mixed together in ways that don't make sense?" His friend shook his head. "It's not how military tactics work, Minho. You need focused, coordinated attacks to be effective." But Minho wasn't convinced. He had spent his career being just good enough at everything instead of perfect at one thing. Maybe that was exactly what they needed against an enemy that could counter perfection. The next morning brought news that changed everything. The enemy fleet had reached the outer colonies. They were no longer just destroying monitoring stations. They were heading for worlds filled with billions of people. Time was running out, and the specialists still had no answers. The emergency council meeting had been going on for 6 hours. Minho stood in the back corner of the command center, watching the alien leaders argue while reports of destroyed colonies kept coming in. Each species wanted to try their specialty. One more time, but bigger and better than before. "We simply need more perfect crystal formations," Veltar insisted, his crystalline body glowing brighter with frustration. "If we can create barriers that are mathematically flawless, they cannot adapt to perfection itself." Commander Li Guan shook her head. "Your barriers lasted 12 minutes against the enemy at Proxima Station. 12 minutes for 3 months of construction." Grex's multiple voices buzzed in harmony. "The hive mind calculations show clear patterns. We can predict their adaptation speed and stay ahead of them with superior coordination." "Your coordination failed at Kepler 7, Thane growled, his reptilian scales shifting to angry red. "We need overwhelming firepower. Build ships so powerful they destroy the enemy before adaptation is possible." Nora flickered with frustration. "All your approaches are limited thinking. Advanced technology will solve this. We need weapons that operate on principles they cannot understand." Minho listened to the same arguments they had been having for days, every specialist was convinced their field held the answer. None of them wanted to admit that their perfect solutions kept failing against an enemy that could. Counter-perfection. Dr. Parkana stood up from her research station. "I've been analyzing the enemy's adaptation patterns," she said, projecting her data onto the main screen. "They respond to specialized attacks within an average of 4 minutes. The more focused and perfect the attack, the faster they adapt." "Then we attack faster," Thane said simply. "We cannot move faster than 4 minutes," Grex replied. "Our calculations show enough," Commander Li Guan interrupted. "We've lost 15 colonies while arguing about theories," the enemy fleet. "We'll reach the core worlds in 8 days. Need solutions that work, not perfect ideas that fail." The meeting broke up with nothing decided. Minho walked back to his duties, fixing broken equipment and helping wherever he was needed. The station was chaotic now. The refugees arriving from the destroyed colonies and military ships preparing for what everyone knew would be a hopeless battle. That night, everything changed. Minho was in the lower levels, fixing a water recycling system, when the emergency alarms started screaming. This time it wasn't the general alarm, it was the internal security warning. Something was wrong inside the station. He ran toward the nearest security station and found chaos. The guards were shooting at small, moving shapes that seemed to flow, like liquid metal. The shapes dodged every shot, then changed form to resist the next weapon that hit them. "Infiltrators," gasped Security Chief Park Dowan. "They came through the waste disposal systems. We can't stop them." Minho watched as the security team tried every weapon they had. Energy weapons, projectile guns, even emergency fire suppression systems. Each time they found something that worked, the infiltrators adapted and became resistant to it. "Where are they heading?" Minho asked. "The research levels? They're trying to reach Dr. Parkana's lab?" Minho's blood went cold. Anna was working late again, studying enemy samples. If these things reached her, she would be trapped alone with creatures that could adapt to any defense. He ran through the corridors toward the research section. Behind him, he could hear the security team still fighting, but their weapons were becoming less effective with each shot. The research level was eerily quiet. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows as Minho made his way to Hannah's lab. He found her barricaded behind an overturned table, holding a plasma cutter like a weapon. "Minho," she called out, "don't come in here. There are 3 of them in the lab. They adapt to everything I try." Through the lab window, Minho could see the infiltrators. They looked like metallic slugs, but they moved with intelligence and purpose. One was examining her research equipment. Another was trying to break through her makeshift barrier. The third was testing different forms, switching between liquid and solid states. "What have you tried?" Minho asked. "Everything. Heat, cold, electricity, sonic waves. They counter each method within seconds." Minho looked around the lab. Unlike the specialists, he didn't have one perfect solution, but he had access to lots of almost good solutions. Maybe that was exactly what he needed. He opened the emergency toolbox and started pulling out random equipment: a sonic wrench, some electrical conduits, a portable heater, and a container of lab cleaning chemicals. None of these things were designed to fight alien infiltrators, but they might work together. "What are you doing?" Hannah asked, as he started connecting the equipment in ways that made no sense. "Something stupid," Minho replied. But stupid might be good enough. He turned on the sonic wrench and taped it to the heater. Then he connected the electrical conduits to the lab's power supply and dropped them into the cleaning chemicals. The mixtures started sparking and making random noises. The infiltrators stopped what they were doing. They seemed confused by the chaotic combination of effects. One moved toward the strange device, trying to understand what it was designed to do. That was when Minho threw the kitchen fire extinguisher at it. The infiltrator tried to adapt to the chemical foam. But while it was changing to resist that, Minho activated the lab's emergency shower system. Cold water poured down while he turned on every piece of equipment in the room. The lab became a chaos of water, foam, electricity, heat, cold, sound, and random chemical reactions. The infiltrators moved frantically, trying to adapt to each new threat. But every time they started to counter one effect, 3 more appeared. They can't handle random chaos, Minho realized. They need patterns to adapt to. He grabbed a handful of research instruments and started using them incorrectly. A microscope became a hammer. A centrifuge became a noisemaker. A sample analyzer became a sprinkler system when he broke it open. The infiltrators were losing their shape, unable to maintain stable forms in the unpredictable environment. Finally, they dissolved completely, leaving only puddles of inactive material. Hannah stared at the destroyed lab in amazement. You defeated them with broken equipment and random actions. Not random, Minho corrected, just not specialized. They couldn't adapt because there was nothing perfect to counter. Dr. Parkhana was quiet for a long moment, looking at the infiltrator. Remains. I've been thinking about this all wrong, she said finally. We've all been thinking about this wrong. What do you mean? The enemy adapts to perfection. Every time we attack them with our best, most refined methods, they learn to counter those exact methods. But humans... She looked at him with new understanding. Humans are generalists. We're never perfect at anything, but we're decent at everything, Minho nodded. That's what she always called me. The almost guy, maybe being almost good at everything, is better than being perfect at one thing, Hannah said. At least against an enemy that can counter perfection, they spent the rest of the night documenting what had happened. Hannah analyzed the infiltrator remains while Minho wrote down exactly how he had defeated them. The method was messy, inefficient, and used tools incorrectly, but it had worked when specialized approaches failed. The next morning, they presented their findings to the emergency council. The reaction was mixed. Some leaders were interested in the concept of adaptive, non-specialized combat. Others dismissed it as desperate thinking. Your species' inability to achieve true expertise is not a strength, Veltar said, his crystalline voice carrying obvious disapproval. It is a fundamental weakness that we have tolerated, but it worked, Commander Li Yiwan pointed out. Minho stopped 3 infiltrators that adapted to every specialized weapon we used. One small victory does not prove a theory, Grex buzzed. The hive mind calculations show that imperfect methods will fail against superior adaptation. Thane's scales shifted to skeptical yellow. Chaos is not a military strategy. Warriors need discipline, focus, and perfect execution. The debate continued for hours. Meanwhile, reports kept coming in about the enemy fleet's approach. They had adapted to every new defense the consortium deployed. Traditional military thinking was failing completely. Finally, Commander Li Guan stood up. We've tried every specialized approach, she said. All of them have failed. The enemy will reach the core worlds in 5 days. We need to try something different. What do you propose? Veltar asked. We give the humans a chance to prove their theory. One mission, led by their adaptive approach, to test whether generalist tactics can work against the enemy, the council argued. For another hour, but desperation finally won. They agreed to one trial mission. Minho found himself chosen to lead it, despite his protests that he was just a maintenance engineer. You're the human who defeated the infiltrators, Hannah told him. You understand how to fight adaptation with chaos. I don't know anything about leading military missions, Minho protested. That's exactly why you might succeed, she replied. You won't try to be perfect at it. As the meeting ended, Minho realized that everything was about to change. The almost guy was being asked to save the galaxy, using methods that weren't supposed to work. But after seeing how his chaotic approach had defeated the infiltrators, he was starting to think that maybe almost good enough was exactly what they need. The briefing room felt too small for such an important meeting. Minho sat at the conference table, still wearing his maintenance uniform. While the most powerful beings in the galaxy debated his fate, he had never imagined that fixing broken equipment would lead to commanding a military mission. Dr. Parkhana stood at the presentation screen, showing the data from their infiltrator encounter. The evidence is clear, she said to the assembled council members. Specialized attacks failed within minutes. The adaptive approach succeeded where perfection could not. Veltar's crystalline form glowed with disapproval. One minor victory against scout organisms does not prove your theory. These infiltrators were simple compared to the main fleet. Your chaotic methods will fail against true military vessels. But they might not, Commander Lee, Guan argued. Every conventional attack has been countered. The enemy adapts to specialized approaches faster than we can develop them. We need to try something different. Grex's multiple voices buzzed in calculated harmony. The hive mind has analyzed this human's methods. Success probability is only 37%. Our coordinated strike plans show 63% effectiveness. Your 63% plans have failed 12 times. Hannah pointed out. The enemy learned to counter coordination within hours. Thane slammed his clawed hand on the table. This is madness. You want to trust our survival to a maintenance worker who fights with broken tools? Warriors need discipline, not chaos. Minna finally spoke up. I'm not asking to lead your entire military. Just give me one ship and a small crew. Let me test the idea against a single enemy vessel. The room fell silent. Nora flickered with curiosity. What exactly would you do differently? I don't know, Minho admitted. That's the point. If I plan everything perfectly, they'll adapt to my plan. But if I keep changing approaches using different methods randomly, they won't know what to counter. That's not strategy, Veltar said coldly. That's chaos. Maybe chaos is what we need, Dr. Parkana said. Our enemy was designed to counter perfection. They might not be able to handle imperfection. The debate continued for hours. Reports kept coming in about the enemy fleet's progress. They had destroyed 3 more colonies and were adapting to every new defense. The consortium's best military minds were running out of ideas. Finally, desperation won. The council agreed to give Minho one chance. He would take a small mixed crew and attempt to capture or destroy an enemy scout ship that was observing their defenses. If his adaptive approach worked, they would consider expanding the strategy. You have 48 hours to prepare, Commander Lee, Guan told him. Choose your crew carefully. This might be our only chance to test human methods before the main fleet arrives. Minho left the meeting feeling overwhelmed. He was a maintenance engineer, not a military commander. But as he walked through the station corridors, he realized that maybe that was exactly what they needed. He started by choosing his crew. Instead of picking the best specialists, he looked for people who were good at multiple things. Yun Taeyong would be his pilot. He could fly anything and fix it too. Dr. Parkana would handle science and medical needs. Crew members who were willing to work differently. The hardest part was convincing the aliens to join. Most of them had been trained to excel in specific roles and found the idea of good enough. At everything deeply uncomfortable, Jereem, a young, crystalline engineer, was the first to volunteer. I have watched the specialist approaches fail, he said in his musical voice. Perhaps there is wisdom in trying something new. Next came Vex, a hive-mind individual who had been studying human behavior. The calculations show low probability of success, Vex admitted. But low probability is better than zero probability. Kira, an energy being who specialized in communications, joined after seeing how the enemy jammed every perfect frequency. Maybe imperfect signals will be harder to block, she said. The most surprising volunteer was Zek, a reptilian warrior who had lost his entire unit to the enemy's adaptive tactics. My perfect training meant nothing against them, he said bitterly. I am willing to try imperfect methods. Minho spent the next day training his crew in adaptive thinking. Instead of assigning fixed roles, he taught them to switch jobs constantly. The crystalline engineer learned basic piloting. The warrior studied communication procedures. The energy being practiced repair work. The alien crew members struggled. With this approach, it had been trained to be perfect at one thing, not adequate at many things. But gradually, they began to understand the concept. This feels wrong, Jerem confessed during a training session. I am not optimized for these tasks. That's the point, Minho explained. If you're not optimized, the enemy can't predict what you'll do next. Dr. Parkana helped by explaining the science behind their approach. The enemy's neural patterns are designed to find perfect solutions, she told the crew. They process information by identifying the most efficient counter to any action. But humans think differently. We use approximations, shortcuts, and good enough solutions. The crew practiced scenarios where they had to solve problems using whatever was available. Instead of the right tool for each job, they learned to use wrong tools in creative ways. It was frustrating at first, but slowly they began to adapt. Their target was an enemy scout ship that had been watching consortium defenses for 3 days. It was smaller than the main fleet vessels, but still dangerous. Intelligence reports showed it had adapted to every scanning method and weapons test the consortium had tried. The scout learns our patterns and sends information back to the main. Fleet Commander Li Guan explained during the final briefing. If you can capture it, we might learn how their adaptation works. If you can destroy it, we stop them from gathering more intelligence. What if we can't do either? Minho asked. Then we'll know adaptive tactics don't work, and we'll prepare. For conventional warfare, the commander replied grimly. The night before the mission, Minho couldn't sleep. He walked through the ship they would be using, a small exploration vessel called the Harmony. It wasn't built for combat, but that might be an advantage. The enemy would expect a warship, not a research vessel. He found Dr. Park Hannah in the ship's lab, running final tests on their equipment. Are you ready for this? She asked. No, Minho admitted. I have no idea what I'm doing. Good, she said with a smile. If you knew exactly what you were doing, they could predict it. Yun Taiyang joined them, looking excited despite the danger. I've been thinking about our approach, he said. What if we don't just fight randomly? What if we fight wrong on purpose? What do you mean? Minho asked. I mean we do everything backwards. Use weapons incorrectly. Fly in patterns that don't make sense. Communicate in ways that break all the rules. If they're designed to counter correct methods, maybe incorrect methods will confuse them. Dr. Park Hannah nodded thoughtfully. Deliberately. Imperfect execution. It's crazy enough that it might work. The next morning, they launched from Kepler Station. The mixed crew of humans and aliens worked together in ways that would have horrified traditional military commanders. Nobody had fixed assignments. Everyone did whatever needed to be done. As they approached the enemy scout ship, Minho felt a strange calm. He wasn't trying to be perfect, wasn't trying to be the best. He was just trying to be good enough too. Survive, and maybe, just maybe, prove that humanity's greatest weakness could become their greatest strength. The scout ship detected their approach and began scanning them. But instead of following standard procedures, Minho ordered random course changes, inconsistent communication attempts, and weapons tests that served no logical purpose. They're trying to analyze our pattern, Vex reported from the communication station. But we don't have a pattern to analyze. Then let's give them something really confusing, Minho said. Everyone switch stations. Do jobs you've never done before. Make this as chaotic as possible. The alien crew members looked terrified, but they followed orders. The crystalline engineer tried to operate weapons, as the warrior attempted navigation. The energy being started running repair diagnostics. Everything went wrong in the most beautiful way possible. And for the first time since the enemy had appeared, Minho felt like they might actually have a chance. The enemy scout ship hung in space like a dark metal insect. It was twice the size of the Harmony and covered in weapons that seemed to shift and change as Minho watched. The ship's hull rippled with organic movements, as if it was alive and thinking they're scanning us, Vex reported from the communication station. The hive-mind individual was struggling with the unfamiliar controls. Their scan patterns are unlike anything in our databases. Good, Minho said from the captain's chair. Kira, start jamming their scans, but do it wrong. Use frequencies that shouldn't work. The energy being flickered with confusion. But incorrect frequencies will be ineffective. That's what they expect, Minho replied. Do it anyway. Kira began transmitting on random frequencies. The jamming was terrible by normal standards, but something interesting happened. The enemy ship's scans faltered, as if it couldn't understand what the chaotic signals were supposed to accomplish. They're adapting slower than usual, Dr. Park Hannah observed from the science station. Their response time is increasing. Dream, fire a warning shot, Minho ordered, but miss on purpose. Make it look like an accident. The young crystalline engineer hesitated. My people do not miss targets. It goes against all training. Then learn something new, Minho said gently. Fire badly. Joram's first shot was perfectly accurate, hitting exactly where he aimed. The enemy ship's shields adapted instantly, becoming resistant to crystal-based weapons. But his second shot wobbled and flew past the target. The third shot hit the ship's hull at a weird angle, bouncing off harmlessly. The enemy ship seemed confused. It had adapted to defend against precise crystal weapons, but the random, inaccurate shots didn't fit any pattern it could counter. Zek, take us closer, Minho commanded. But fly like you're drunk. The reptilian warrior's scales shifted to embarrassed green. My flying skills are perfect. I do not know how to fly badly. Then break some rules, Yoon Tae-young suggested from the co-pilot seat. Do everything flight school said never to do. Zek began flying in patterns that made no sense. He accelerated when he should have slowed down, turned left when right was. Logical, and kept changing altitude randomly. The Harmony moved like a damaged ship piloted by someone who had never flown before. The enemy scout ship tried to predict their movements, but every prediction was wrong. It moved to intercept paths that Zek immediately abandoned. It positioned weapons to fire at locations the Harmony was already leaving. They're having trouble tracking us, Vex reported. Their targeting systems keep recalculating. Outcomes? The fun part, Minho said. Everyone switched stations again. Do jobs you've never tried before. The crew looked terrified, but followed orders. Dr. Park Hannah took over weapons control. Despite knowing nothing about combat systems, Vex tried to pilot the ship using hive mind coordination methods that didn't work on human controls. Kira attempted to run shield systems, energy being techniques that were completely wrong for the equipment. The Harmony became a chaos of malfunction and confusion. Weapons fired at random intervals. The ship lurched in impossible directions. Shields flickered on and off without reason. Communications sent messages that were half static and half dash nonsense. It was a beautiful disaster. It was working. The enemy scout ship began to slow its responses. Its adaptive systems were overloading as they tried to counter tactics that made no sense. Every time it developed a counter strategy, the Harmony's crew switched to something completely different. They're trying to communicate, Vex called out. From the pilot seat, where he was making the ship spin in circles. Ignore them, Minho said. Actually, no. Answer them, but say something stupid. Kira, who was now trying to manage life support systems, sent a transmission that was half mathematical equations and half recipes for human food. The enemy ship's response was a long silence. I think we confused them, Dr. Park Hannah said while accidentally firing the ship's emergency flares instead of the main weapons. That was when Minho realized they had a real chance. The enemy scout ship had stopped adapting. It was just floating in space, apparently unable to process what was happening. Jareem, prepare the capture beam, Minho ordered. But install it backwards. That will not work. The crystalline engineer protested. Perfect, Minho replied. Do it anyway. While Jareem struggled with the impossible task, Minho explained his plan to the crew. We're going to capture this ship, but we're going to do it wrong. Everything they expect us to do, we'll do the opposite. The capture beam, installed backwards and operated by someone who didn't understand it, somehow managed to grab the enemy scout ship. The beam flickered, sparked, and made sounds that indicated it was about to break, but it held. We did it, Zek said in amazement. We actually caught them. The victory was just beginning. As teams of specialists boarded the captured scout ship, they found something incredible. The enemy's computer systems were filled with data about consortium military tactics, but the data was useless. The ship's artificial intelligence had been designed to counter perfect strategies, not chaotic ones. Dr. Park Hannah led the analysis. Team that studied the capture technology. Their neural networks are fascinating, she explained to the debriefing committee. They process information by finding optimal solutions to every problem. But humans don't think that way. We use shortcuts, approximations, and good enough answers. The scout ship's computer had recorded thousands of successful adaptations to specialized attacks. Crystal weapons, energy beams, coordinated strikes, hive mind tactics. It knew how to counter all of them. But it had no data on how to fight opponents who used tools incorrectly, made random decisions, and changed strategies for no logical reason. This changes everything, Commander Lee Juan said during the emergency council meeting. If one human-led crew can capture an enemy ship, Imagine what a whole fleet could do. The council members who had doubted the human approach were now eager to learn more. Veltar, who had called human methods chaotic, asked for training in adaptive tactics. Grex wanted to integrate random elements into hive mind coordination. Even Thane admitted that perfect warrior training might not be enough against this enemy. But the real breakthrough came when they examined the scout ship's mission logs. The enemy fleet, which they learned was called the Perfectors, had been studying the galaxy for months. They had detailed analyses of every species' military capabilities, but their files on humans were almost empty.
Ow.
They don't understand us, Dr. Parkana realized. Every other species has clear specializations and predictable behaviors. But humans are generalists. We're the one species they can't figure out. The Perfectors' own logs revealed their confusion. They had entries like human subjects exhibit inconsistent performance across all measured categories, and unable to determine primary species function or optimal counter strategies. Minho found himself promoted from maintenance engineer to strategic coordinator. His job was to teach other crews how to fight adaptively. It was strange being the teacher when he had always been the student. But he discovered that teaching good enough was easier than teaching perfection. The new mixed crews of humans and aliens proved devastatingly effective. They combined human adaptability with alien expertise in ways that shouldn't have worked but did. A crystalline engineer who had learned to think like a human generalist became unpredictable. A hive-mind individual who embraced chaos could coordinate random attacks. Energy beings who accepted imperfection could jam enemy systems more effectively than perfect specialists. The war began to turn. Perfector ships that had easily defeated traditional fleets found themselves struggling against opponents who refused to follow logical patterns. The enemy's adaptation speed slowed as they encountered tactics that made no sense. But the Perfectors were learning too. After losing several scout ships to adaptive attacks, they began developing new strategies. Instead of trying to counter human methods, they started trying to create chaos of their own. They're adapting to our adaptation, Minho warned, a strategy meeting. We need to stay ahead of them. How do we out-adapt someone who's learning to adapt? Yun Tae-young asked. We do what humans do best, Minho replied. We keep changing. We never get comfortable with any one approach. We stay almost good at everything instead of becoming perfect at anything. The war entered a new phase. Both sides were learning and evolving, but humans had one advantage the Perfectors lacked. Where the enemy sought perfect solutions, humans embraced imperfect ones. Where the Perfectors tried to eliminate chaos, humans learned to thrive in it. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the best way to fight perfection was with determined mediocrity. And the almost guy who had once been dismissed as adequate was now leading the charge to prove that almost good enough might be exactly what the universe needed. Reports came in of major victories across multiple star systems. The Perfector fleet, which had seemed unstoppable, was being pushed back by mixed crews using adaptive tactics. But everyone knew the real test was still coming. The enemy's main fleet was approaching the core worlds, and they would be ready for anything the Consortium could throw at them, almost anything. The massive Perfector world ship filled the view screen like a dark planet made of metal and flesh. It was larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen, big enough to hold entire cities inside its hull. Strange lights pulsed along its surface. As organic components grew and changed in real time, Minho stood in the command center of the Consortium flagship, watching the monster approach Earth. 3 months of successful adaptive warfare had led to this moment. The enemy's main fleet was retreating, but their ultimate weapon was heading straight for the world that had taught the galaxy how to fight imperfection. All defensive fleets are in position, Commander Lee Giwan reported.
200 ships.
From 50 different species, all using adaptive tactics? It won't be enough, Dr. Parkana said, studying the sensor readings. That world ship is adapting to everything we throw at it before we even attack. It's learned from every battle we've fought. The communication system crackled to life. Dr. Parkana's voice came through clearly, but her words carried the weight of desperation. Minho, I need you to lead the final assault. You're my first call when things go bad. You remember when She had first called him the almost guy, with contempt in her voice. Now she was calling him with respect and hope. The change meant everything and nothing at the same time. What mattered was stopping the world ship before it reached Earth. "What do we know about its capabilities?" Minho asked. "Everything," Hannah replied grimly. "It's been studying our adaptive tactics for weeks. The ship can counter chaos, predict randomness, and even create its own forms of imperfection. It's learned to fight like us." Yoon Tae-young looked up from the pilot controls. "So how do we beat an enemy that's learned to be almost as good as us at being almost good?" "We don't," Minho said quietly. "We beat them by being human." This assault began badly. The first wave of adaptive ships attacked the world ship using every chaotic tactic they had learned. But the enemy was ready. It countered their random movements with its own chaos. It met their imperfect attacks with calculated imperfection. It had learned to fight fire with fire. "They're matching us," Vex reported from the communication station. "Every adaptive strategy we use, they have a counter-adaptive response." Minho watched the battle unfold on the tactical display. Ships from across the galaxy were fighting with everything they had, but the world ship was learning faster than they could adapt. It was like watching a perfect student who had studied all the wrong answers and learned to get them right. Trying to be like us, he realized. But they're still trying to be perfect at it. "What do you mean?" Dr. Park Hannah asked. "They've learned to copy our tactics, but they're still thinking like perfecters. They want to be perfectly adaptive, flawlessly, chaotic, optimally random. But that's not how humans work." Minho turned to address the mixed crew around him, humans and aliens who had learned to work together in ways that shouldn't make sense. "No, we're not trying to be perfectly imperfect. We're just trying to be good. Enough to survive and maybe help our friends." He opened a channel to all the ships in the fleet. "This is Minho to all vessels. Stop trying to be perfectly adaptive. Stop trying to be the best at being chaotic. Just be yourselves. Do what feels right in the moment. Trust your instincts, not your training." The change was immediate. Instead of following adaptive protocols, the fleet began fighting with genuine human randomness. Crystalline Engineer decided to ram his ship into the world ship's weapon array, not because it was tactically sound, but because he was angry about his destroyed home world. A Hivemind pilot started singing an old folk song, while flying evasive maneuvers just because it felt right. The world ship's responses became confused. It could counter calculated chaos, but it couldn't predict genuine emotion. It could adapt to strategic randomness, but it couldn't understand why someone would make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. "It's working," Kira reported, her energy form flickering with excitement. "Their adaptation rate is slowing down." But the world ship had one more trick. Instead of trying to counter the human emotions, it began broadcasting its own emotional signals. Fear, anger, sadness, and confusion flooded the communication channels. The enemy was trying to overload the human crews with artificial feelings. "They're trying to break us psychologically," Dr. Park Hannah warned. "They've learned that human emotions are unpredictable, so they're trying to make us too emotional to function." Minho felt the artificial fear washing over him, but he had spent his whole life being told he wasn't good enough. One more voice telling him he would fail didn't bother him much. "All crews, ignore the emotional broadcasts. Remember, we're not trying to be perfect. We're just trying to be good enough." The battle reached its climax when the world ship opened its main weapon array. Instead of energy beams or projectiles, it began broadcasting perfect solutions. Every tactical problem the consortium fleet faced was instantly solved by the enemy's calculations. It was showing them exactly how to win, hoping to trap them in. Perfect responses it could counter. "Don't listen to the perfect solutions," Minho ordered. "Use the good enough ones instead." The fleet ignored the enemy's helpful advice and continued fighting with determination rather than perfection. They made mistakes, took unnecessary risks, and used strategies that were clearly suboptimal. But they were unpredictable in ways the world ship couldn't counter. The end came when Minho realized what the world ship's greatest weakness was. It was trying to be perfect at being imperfect. But there was one thing it couldn't do perfectly. It couldn't truly fail. "Dream, I need you to deliberately crash into their shields," he ordered. "But do it wrong. Miss the target you're aiming for.
That makes no sense.
The crystalline engineer replied. Exactly, Minho said. Do it anyway. Jorm's ship flew toward the world ship's shields, but instead of hitting them head-on, he crashed into a completely different section by accident. The collision created a feedback loop that the world ship couldn't have calculated because it was based on genuine failure. Rather than planned imperfection, the shields flickered and died. The world ship's perfect systems couldn't handle actual mistakes mixed with intentional chaos. Its adaptation protocols crashed as they tried to process the difference between calculated failure and real failure. All ships attack the shield. Generator Minho ordered, but don't aim for it. Aim for something else and hit it by accident. The fleet began the strangest attack in military history. Ships fired at empty space and hit crucial systems by mistake. Weapons malfunctioned at exactly the right moment to cause maximum damage. Pilots got lost and accidentally flew into vital components. The world ship's AI systems overloaded completely. They had been designed to counter perfect strategies and had learned to counter imperfect ones. But they couldn't process attacks that were based on genuine accidents and authentic mistakes. The massive vessel began to break apart. Its organic components withered as the controlling intelligence failed. The metal sections separated and drifted away like the pieces of a broken toy. They're requesting surrender, Vex reported in amazement. The entire Perfector fleet is powering down their weapons. The war was over. The galaxy had been saved by the almost guy who had learned to embrace being good enough. The species that couldn't do anything perfectly had proven that perfection wasn't always the answer. In the aftermath, as rescue ships collected survivors and diplomats began negotiating peace terms, Minho sat in the quiet command center. Dr. Park Hannah joined him, looking exhausted but happy. I was wrong about you, she said. You're not the almost guy anymore. Yes, I am, Minho replied with a smile. I'm still almost good at everything and not perfect at anything. That's what makes me human. And that's what saved us all. She said the galaxy began to change. The rigid specialization that had defined galactic civilization for millennia gave way to flexible cooperation. Species that had focused on single areas of expertise began learning from human generalists. The perfectors, humbled by their defeat, started the slow process of learning to accept imperfection. Minho established the Institute for Adaptive Studies, where beings from across the galaxy came to learn that being almost good enough at everything was sometimes better than being perfect at one thing. Dr. Park Hannah became his partner in running the institute. Finally understanding that the maintenance engineer had been teaching everyone the most important lesson of all, the universe entered a new age of exploration and cooperation. When problems arose that required perfect solutions, the specialists were called. But when things went really wrong, when chaos and adaptation were needed, they called the humans, and the humans answered. Not with perfection, but with the determination to keep trying, keep adapting, and never stop being almost good enough at everything. Because sometimes, being the almost guy was exactly what the galaxy needed. The label that had once been an insult became a badge of honor. In a universe full of perfect specialists, the generalists who were almost good at everything had proven their worth. And when the next crisis came, everyone knew who they would call first.